What if having a massive, dictionary-level vocabulary was actually a massive disadvantage in a word game?
I mean, it completely breaks the fundamental assumption we all bring to these types of puzzles.
Right.
We're conditioned to believe that longer, more complex words naturally equate to success because they just yield more points. Finding a seven-letter word is supposed to be this ultimate triumph.
Oh, totally. Picture this. You're staring at a grid of letters. You spot this brilliant, obscure seven-letter masterpiece tucked away in the top left corner. You play it, feeling incredibly smug. And because you played that massive word, you instantly lose the match to an opponent who just played the word C-A-T.
Yeah, which sounds ridiculous.
It does. But today, we are completely tearing up that assumption. Welcome to today's custom-tailored deep dive designed specifically for you. We're analyzing the developer documentation for a mobile app called LetterGrid.
And our mission today is really to figure out how this specific set of mechanics takes the familiar, usually very quiet, solitary act of a word search.
Yes, sitting with a cup of tea.
Exactly, and transforms it into a ruthless, spatial turf war.
I love that. So let's unpack this. Imagine if Scrabble or Wordle decided to crossbreed with the board game Risk.
Yeah.
How does a word game become a turf war?
Well, the shift happens the moment a game stops tracking abstract points and starts tracking physical real estate.
Okay, so points don't matter.
Not in the traditional sense. In a standard word puzzle, your vocabulary is just a mechanism to make a number go up on a scoreboard. LetterGrid uses those same letters, but your vocabulary becomes a tool to literally conquer geographical territory on the board itself.
I am trying to visualize how that actually plays out in real time, because the documentation outlines that this is a multiplayer, turn-based game. You play against friends, strangers online, or even an AI bot.
Right.
But the foundational mechanic, the thing that makes that CT versus seven-letter word scenario possible, is that when you trace a word on the grid, the tiles you use actually change to your color. You physically own them now.
Which forces a complete rewiring of your strategic priorities. You are no longer asking your brain, what is the most impressive word I can find?
Which is so hard to let go of.
Oh, it really is. But you have to ask, what is the most geographically useful word I can find for this specific moment in the match?
So if that brilliant seven-letter word is in a corner of the board that has, zero strategic value.
Claiming it is a complete waste of a turn.
Wow.
Meanwhile, a simple three-letter word like see it might bridge a vital gap right in the center of the grid, securing a choke point that prevents your opponent from advancing.
That is wild. So the mental math completely changes. I'm essentially playing Risk, but instead of rolling dice to move armies, I'm deploying vowels and consonants.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
But how do you actually declare a winner in a turf war like this? I'm looking at the developer description, and it outlines two distinct game modes, invasion and territory.
Right, two very different beasts.
Yeah, the rules for how you expand in these two modes seem fundamentally at odds with each other. Why would a game feature two completely different sets of spatial rules?
Well, because they demand completely different psychological approaches to conflict. Let's look at the mechanics of invasion mode first.
Okay, the bridge building one.
Yes. The victory condition there is to build a continuous, unbroken chain of words from your starting border all the way across the grid to your opponent's border.
Sounds straightforward enough?
It sounds it, but the restrictive rule here is that every single new word you play must originate from a tile you already own. You are totally tethered to your own progression.
Building a bridge across a river while under heavy fire. That's the image I'm getting. It forces a very linear, highly focused advance.
It's that.
I mean, I have to carefully extend my line piece by piece, anchored to my own territory, driving straight toward the enemy base.
Okay.
But that sounds incredibly fragile.
Oh, it is.
If I can only branch out from the tip of my spear, my opponent knows exactly where my vanguard is.
They do, and that predictability is the core tension of invasion mode. You are basically managing a highly vulnerable supply line.
So they don't even need to watch the whole board.
No, they only need to defend the specific geographical radius around your leading tiles. It creates this focused, intense front line where every single letter placement is about either advancing that line or blocking the opponent's advance.
Okay, now contrast that extreme restriction with the second mode, territory.
Yeah, the rules completely open up here.
Right, the goal isn't to reach the opposite side at all. The objective is simply to occupy a set number of tiles before your opponent does. And the expansion rule is way looser. To play a new word, you don't have to start from an owned tile.
You only need to use at least one tile you already own, anywhere within the new word.
The tactical shift there is massive. I mean, in invasion, you are thrusting a spear. In territory, you are executing an aggressive real estate land grab.
Exactly. Because you can use an owned tile at the end or even in the middle of a new word, you can leapfrog outward in completely unpredictable directions.
I could use an S I own to make the word SWS and suddenly stretch my territory 5 tiles backward or sideways, completely bypassing the front line.
Which means the concept of a front line almost disappears. Territory mode rewards maximizing your surface area and creating a multi-front war.
So you're just sprawling.
Right. You want to sprout tendrils in every possible direction so your opponent can never predict where your next massive land grab will originate. Invasion is about linear momentum. Territory is about sprawling dominance.
But wait, if I'm sprawling out in territory mode or driving my bridge forward in invasion mode, eventually my expanding borders are going to physically collide with my opponent's borders. What happens then? Is it just a solid wall I have to navigate around?
No, you can break through. In fact, you have to.
Really?
Yeah, this isn't parallel play where you just passively admire each other's vocabulary. The documentation explicitly details that you must use strategy to actively steal your opponent's tiles and cut off their paths.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Usually, word games are pretty polite. You take your turn, I take mine. This sounds downright vicious. I can actually hijack someone else's carefully planned path.
You absolutely can. If a letter tile is owned by your opponent and you use it to form a new valid word connected to your territory, that tile changes to your color.
So if my opponent is one word away from reaching my border in invasion mode, I don't just try to race them to the finish line. I can find a word that overlaps their tiles, flip them to my color, and literally break their bridge in half.
You sever their supply line. And because that offensive mechanic exists, your defensive strategy has to evolve constantly. Anticipating your opponent's vocabulary becomes just as critical as knowing your own.
So I have to look at the board from their perspective.
Yes. When you place a word, you have to analyze the exposed letters and the surrounding geography, asking yourself what potential words your opponent could form to steal those specific tiles back.
It's like analyzing pawn structures in chess, but the pawns are letters.
That's a great analogy.
Okay, but this brings up a huge red flag for me regarding the competitive integrity of the game. I'm looking at a feature mentioned in the source material, and automatic check for valid words.
Yes, the auto check.
If the game automatically validates whether a string of letters is a real word, doesn't that completely undermine the skill required?
How do you mean?
Well, I wouldn't even need to be a human dictionary. If I see a crucial choke point I desperately want to steal, I could just drag my thumb around in a panic, mashing letters together until the game pings and says, "Congratulations, you accidentally spelled a 12th century Welsh word and severed the enemy line." That makes it a game of pure luck.
It introduces an element of chaos, certainly, but it actually serves a vital design purpose when you look at the broader ecosystem of the game.
Really? How does button mashing serve a purpose?
Well, in a traditional word board game, guessing is heavily penalized. If you play a fake word, you might lose your turn or face a point penalty if challenged.
Right, which makes everyone play really cautiously.
Exactly. It creates a very rigid environment. LetterGrid's automatic check actively encourages trial and error. It wants players testing aggressive, bizarre maneuvers just to see if a combination might miraculously break an enemy line.
But how is it fair to lose a highly strategic match to someone who just got lucky with a frantic swipe?
Because over a long enough timeline, statistical variance levels out, and the game has systems built in to account for that. The developer documentation outlines a highly robust tracking and ranking ecosystem. They use an ELO rating system.
Oh, like in chess. That's the mathematical system used to rank grandmasters. You gain points for winning, but you actually take points away from the loser, and the amount depends on the difference in your relative ranks.
Right, and that ELO system is the perfect counterweight to the trial and error mechanic.
Because the lucky players won't win consistently.
Exactly. A player might get incredibly lucky once or twice by blindly swiping and stumbling onto an obscure word. But a player relying on blind luck will never consistently beat a player who is meticulously planning their spatial expansion, identifying choke points, and managing their surface area.
That makes a lot of sense.
The ELO system ensures that the tactical strategists naturally float to the top of the leaderboards, while the random swipers stay at the bottom. The automatic check lowers the barrier to entry so anyone can play, but the ELO system preserves the incredibly high skill ceiling.
It treats word searching with the analytical rigor of an esport. The source also mentions extensive player statistics, graphs tracking your progress over time, and leaderboards for both recent wins and overall rating. You aren't just playing isolated matches, you're managing a long-term campaign of territorial dominance.
It's a deep metagame.
But speaking of that barrier to entry, there's one feature in this documentation that completely reframed how I look at this app.
The languages.
Yes, it supports 11 different languages: English, Finnish, Danish, Norwegian, Swedish, French, German, Russian, Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian.
The implications of that multi-language support, especially when combined with the trial and error mechanic we just analyzed, are profound.
I mean, think about it. You could theoretically use this to learn a new language. Instead of opening a traditional language learning app and matching pictures to flashcards, I could just queue up a ranked match against a stranger in Finland.
And just start swiping.
Right. I could sit there furiously swiping combinations of Finnish letters, trying to figure out how to steal a single tile just to save my territory.
You are tapping right into the cognitive science of how we retain information.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Row memorization often fails because there are no stakes and no context. LetterGrid essentially disguises vocabulary education as high-stakes warfare. You are highly motivated to discover words because your virtual survival depends on it.
And the developer actively facilitates that learning process, too. The source notes the inclusion of word definitions and quick links to word information on the web directly inside the app.
That's a crucial feature.
If I stumble onto that obscure word or a complex Italian verb, I can tap it and instantly understand what it means.
And the emotional anchor attached to that discovery makes the memory incredibly sticky. You aren't just learning the Italian word for apple in a vacuum. You are learning the exact sequence of letters that allowed you to execute a flawless flanking maneuver, sever your opponent's bridge, and secure an invasion victory.
So the adrenaline of the spatial combat cements the linguistic knowledge.
Exactly. Even in the middle of a cutthroat ELO-ranked match, players are organically expanding their real-world vocabulary through the fire of trial and error.
It creates this fascinating global ecosystem of people battling it out while simultaneously teaching each other. And to support that community aspect, the documentation mentions a built-in chat feature to exchange messages with your opponent.
Which is brilliant.
You could pull off a devastating steal, completely ruin their strategy, and then politely use the chat to ask them what the Finnish word you just accidentally played actually translates to.
The social friction is a core part of the design. But, for players who want to engage with the mechanics without the intense pressure of a live opponent and a ticking clock, the game does provide an alternative.
Right, the daily puzzles.
Yes, the inclusion of daily puzzles, complete with their own separate leaderboards, acts as a crucial training ground.
It's like the gymnasium, where you go to spar before stepping into the ranked arena. You can test those sprawling territory strategies or practice managing the vulnerable supply lines of invasion mode at your own pace.
And you can experiment with the geometry of the board without risking your hard-earned ELO rating.
It rounds out the whole ecosystem.
Yeah.
You have the high-stakes live combat, the casual daily practice, the deep statistical tracking, and the linguistic discovery, all built on top of a mechanic that turns a letter into a physical piece of owned land.
It forces players to utilize an entirely different part of their brain than traditional anagram puzzles require.
We have thoroughly dismantled the idea that a word game has to be a quiet, polite exercise.
Yeah.
Let's synthesize all of this for you, the listener.
Yeah, why does this matter?
If you are someone who enjoys the basic, brain-tickling satisfaction of a crossword, Scrabble, or Wordle, but you find yourself craving real strategic depth, if you want a head-to-head tactical experience where you have to anticipate enemy movements, manage physical space, track deep performance statistics, and potentially learn a new language under Fire LetterGrid represents a massive evolutionary leap for the genre. It takes the abstract concept of your vocabulary and weaponizes it into real estate.
It really does. And, the mechanics of this game leave a lingering philosophical question, especially when we look at how it intertwines language with conflict and borders.
Yeah.
In this digital space, the literal boundaries of your territory, your ability to expand, and your capacity to defend yourself against invasion are strictly dictated by the borders of your vocabulary. It begs the question of how that mirrors our physical reality. Do we, in our own lives, control our environments, define our boundaries, and navigate our interpersonal conflicts entirely through the limits of the words we possess?
The limits of our language mean the limits of our world. That is an incredibly heavy, fascinating concept to leave hanging in the air.
It's something to think about.
Thank you for joining us on this custom deep dive. We hope analyzing the tactical battleground of LetterGrid gave you a new perspective on how mechanics can completely alter our mental math. Keep exploring the sources, keep challenging the rules of the games you play, and definitely watch your borders the next time you put a word down on a board. We will catch you on the next one.